Some prizes are worth more than gold, more than kingdoms. They're worth a soul's salvation. In the shadow-soaked catacombs beneath Prague's oldest cathedral, where candles flicker against stone walls carved with symbols older than Christ, an auction unlike any other is about to begin. Dr. Elena Vasquez, still in her blood-stained hospital scrubs from her shift at the University Medical Center, finds herself shackled to an ornate chair as creatures she'd dismissed as folklore circle her, like predators sensing wounded prey. The vampires bid with ancient coins, priceless artifacts, and promises of territory. But when Lord Cassius, pale as moonlight with eyes like burning amber, steps forward and declares her worth his 1,000-year fortune, Elena realizes this isn't about her blood's rarity. It's about something far more dangerous, hope. Hope that after centuries of darkness she might hold the key to their redemption. What she doesn't know is that her grandmother's bedtime stories about brave women who hunted monsters weren't fairy tales. They were family history. And now Elena must decide if she'll embrace a legacy written in blood, or become the very thing her ancestors died fighting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cathedral's ancient stones seemed to pulse with malevolent energy as Elena's rational mind struggled to process what surrounded her. The metallic taste of fear coated her tongue, ironic considering her expertise in blood chemistry had earned her a PhD from Charles University just 8 blocks away. 8 blocks that might as well have been 8 centuries. This can't be real. The thought hammered against her skull as she tested the ornate shackles binding her wrists. The metal was warm, almost alive, and carved with symbols that made her eyes water when she tried to focus on them. Elaborate hoax, medical conference prank, psychotic break. But the explanations crumbled when she breathed in the air, thick with the copper scent of old blood and something else, something that made her hindbrain scream predator with primitive terror. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Eternal Court," a voice rang through the stone chamber, cultured and cold as winter wind. The auctioneer stood on a raised dais, his pale skin seeming to absorb the candlelight rather than reflect it. "Tonight, we offer something unprecedented." Elena's gaze swept the assembled bidders, her scientific mind cataloguing impossibilities. Skin too pale, movements too fluid, eyes that caught light like a cat's, but burned with intelligence that spoke of decades, centuries, of accumulated knowledge and hunger. Porphyria, she told herself desperately. Photosensitive genetic disorder, mass delusion, anything but. "The good doctor's blood type is Rh null," the auctioneer continued, and Elena's breath caught. Only 43 people worldwide carried her blood type. She'd made a career studying its unique properties. But as our scholars have confirmed, her lineage traces to the Vasquez hunters of 15th century Romania. The name hit her like a physical blow. Grandmother's stories flooded back, tales told in the flickering light of their Chicago apartment about brave women who protected villages Frostragoi. Elena had treasured those moments, even as she'd grown old enough to recognize them as folklore, sanitized versions of peasant superstitions her immigrant grandmother had brought from the old country. "The legends speak of blood that burns like liquid silver in our veins," the auctioneer's voice dropped to a reverent whisper. "Blood that can break the curse of eternal night." A murmur rippled through the assembled vampires, some hopeful, others skeptical, all hungry. Elena pressed herself back against the chair, her medical training warring with the evidence of her senses. These creatures moved wrong, breathed wrong, existed wrong according to every law of biology she'd spent her life studying. Then Lord Cassius stepped fully into the light, and Elena's world tilted. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that belonged to no particular era, yet somehow transcended time. His pale hair was pulled back, revealing features that could have been carved from marble by a Renaissance master, beautiful in the way that made mortals weep and forget to breathe. But it was his eyes that trapped her, amber like honey, ancient like stone, and filled with a desperate hope that made her chest tighten. "She doesn't just carry hunter's blood," he said, his accent cultured but indefinable, as if he'd spoken a dozen languages across centuries. She carries your blood. Elena Vasquez's direct line. The name sent ice through Elena's veins. Ileana, her grandmother's name. Her grandmother who died peacefully in a Chicago nursing home, surrounded by medical equipment and the antiseptic smell of modern healthcare, not wooden stakes and holy water. Impossible, someone hissed from the shadows. Ileana's line ended in 1847. Did it? Cassius's smile was sharp as a blade. Tell me, Dr. Vasquez, what did your grandmother die of? Elena's mouth went dry. She'd been in Prague when the call came, attending a hematology conference. By the time she'd flown back to Chicago, grandmother Ileana was already cremated, her final wishes carried out with suspicious efficiency by lawyers Elena had never heard of. Heart failure, she whispered. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Ileana had been 93, yes, but sharp as winter wind until the end. She'd never mentioned heart problems, never seemed frail. Or perhaps Cassius stepped closer, and Elena caught his scent, pine forests and old leather, snow and something darker. She finally succumbed to wounds earned in a battle you never knew she'd fought. The cathedral seemed to spin around Elena. Every rational thought she'd built her life upon cracked like ice under spring thaw, because now, looking into Cassius's ancient eyes, she could see something that terrified her more than fangs or supernatural strength, recognition. As if he'd been waiting centuries to find her. The bidding, the auctioneer announced, begins at 1 million euros. The vampire stirred like hunting cats, but Elena barely heard the rising offers. Her mind reeled with impossible possibilities, each more terrifying than her current captivity. Because if her grandmother had truly been what these creatures claimed, then Elena's entire understanding of herself, her family, her very blood, was built on lies. And somewhere in the darkness of her terror, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, those childhood stories about brave women fighting monsters weren't fairy tales after all. They were destiny, the ordinary world. The memory shattered like glass against stone as Elena's consciousness clawed its way back to the present. The cathedral's oppressive darkness dissolved into the sterile fluorescent brightness of University Hospital's hematology lab, where she sat hunched over her microscope at 3:47 a.m., her white coat wrinkled from another 18-hour shift. Just a dream. Another nightmare. But her hands trembled as she adjusted the microscope's focus, and the taste of ancient stone and copper blood lingered on her tongue like a warning she couldn't decode. "Dr. Vasquez?" The night nurse's voice made Elena jump, nearly knocking over her coffee. Cold now, bitter dregs that matched the exhaustion gnawing at her bones. "The RH null patient in room 14 is asking for you again." Elena rubbed her temples, trying to banish the phantom echo of an auctioneer's voice. 6 months since Prague, since that conference where she'd lost 3 days to what doctors called a stress-induced fugue state. 6 months of nightmares so vivid they felt like memories, of waking with the taste of fear and the sensation of shackles around her wrists. "Tell Mr. Kowalski I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd become the world's leading expert on her own impossible blood type, the golden blood that fewer than 50 people carried. The blood that, in her dreams, made ancient creatures bid fortunes for the chance to taste. Her reflection in the lab's darkened window looked haggard. 32 years old, and she felt ancient, hollowed out by work and grief and the persistent sense that something fundamental was missing from her life. Dark circles shadowed eyes that her grandmother had always said were too knowing for their own good. Ileana had been dead 8 months now, and Elena still reached for the phone every Sunday morning, muscle memory aching for those weekly calls that had anchored her to something real. Heart failure, the lawyers had said. Peaceful. No suffering. But in Elena's dreams, her grandmother died with silver daggers in her hands and ancient words on her lips, fighting shadows that moved wrong in the darkness. Elena shook her head sharply. Grief did strange things to the mind. She'd learned that in medical school, though they'd never mentioned how it could make fairy tales feel more real than fluorescent-lit hospital corridors. Her phone buzzed. Another text from David. "Dinner tomorrow? That new place on Michigan Ave. You need to eat actual food, not lab vending machine survival rations." David Chen, fellow hematologist, good friend, and the closest thing she had to a romantic relationship if 3 awkward coffee dates counted. He was brilliant, kind, exactly the sort of stable, rational man she should want. The sort who understood her dedication to work, who didn't mind that she often forgot to return calls or showed up to department parties with blood samples still under her fingernails. He was also utterly, devastatingly boring. Elena typed back. Rain check, swamped with the Morrison case. The lie came easily. Mrs. Morrison's blood work was routine, nothing that required Elena's personal attention. But the thought of sitting across from David, pretending to care about his detailed analysis of their latest grant proposal while her dreams whispered of amber eyes and impossible futures, felt like suffocating. The lab door opened, and Dr. Sarah Kim slipped inside, her emergency scrubs stained with coffee and something that might have been chocolate. "Another all-nighter?" "Elena, when's the last time you went home?" "Tuesday," Elena admitted, then caught Sarah's horrified expression. "Or Wednesday? What day is it?" "Friday night. Or Saturday morning, depending on your philosophical stance on time." Sarah perched on the lab stool beside her, studying Elena with the clinical eye that made her an excellent physician. "You look like hell. Beautiful, brilliant hell, but hell nonetheless." Elena laughed, the sound hollow in the sterile space. "Charming bedside manner, Dr. Kim. It's the charm that got me through residency." Sarah's expression grew serious. "But really, Elena, this isn't healthy. You've been pushing yourself like this since Prague," Elena finished. "I know." What she couldn't explain was the restlessness that had taken root in her chest since that lost weekend. The sense that she was sleepwalking through a life that didn't quite fit, going through motions that felt increasingly hollow. She'd built a careful existence, prestigious position, respected research, colleagues who valued her expertise. She should have been satisfied. Instead, she felt like she was waiting for something her rational mind insisted didn't exist. "Maybe you should take that sabbatical Dr. Martinez mentioned," Sarah suggested gently. "Travel. See something besides hospital walls and blood samples." Elena's laugh was bitter. Where would I go? Prague again to chase more nightmares? But even as she said it, a traitorous part of her whispered eyes. Return to those ancient streets where something had called to her blood, where stone cathedrals held secrets that made her pulse quicken with recognition she couldn't name. "Elena." Sarah's voice turned sharp, clinical. "Your phone." Elena blinked, realizing her phone had been buzzing insistently for the past 30 seconds. The display showed an international number she didn't recognize, but something about the Prague country code made her stomach clench. "Dr. Vasquez?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight European accent. "This is Dr. Marcus Thorne from Charles University. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time." Elena glanced at the clock, 4:15 a.m. "It's fine. How can I help you?" "I'm calling regarding your grandmother's estate. There were some irregularities discovered during the archival process, items that weren't included in her will but appear to be specifically intended for you." The lab suddenly felt too cold. "Irregularities? My grandmother died 8 months ago. Everything was settled by her lawyers." "That's just it, Dr. Vasquez. We can't locate any record of these lawyers. The firm that handled her estate, Blackwood and Associates, seems to have vanished entirely. But we found a safety deposit box here in Prague, registered under Elena Vasquez, with your name as the sole beneficiary." Elena's hand tightened on the phone. "That's impossible. My grandmother lived in Chicago her entire adult life. She never mentioned anything in Prague." "Nevertheless, the box exists, and given your recent conference attendance here, you're already in our system. The Czech authorities require a blood relative to handle the transfer, and given the unique nature of some of the contents, they've requested your personal involvement. Sarah was watching her with growing concern, but Elena couldn't look away from her own reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back looked haunted, as if she'd seen ghosts. What kind of contents? Elena heard herself ask. Dr. Thorne's pause stretched too long. Documents, personal effects, some items of what appears to be historical significance. I think it would be better if you saw them yourself. How soon could you travel to Prague? The rational part of Elena's mind, the part that had earned her PhD, that trusted in peer review and scientific method, screamed warnings. Strange calls at 4 a.m., mysterious estates, lawyers who didn't exist. Every red flag in the book. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. The old country holds many secrets, Draga. Some are meant to stay buried. Others wait for the right blood to wake them. Elena had always assumed it was poetic nonsense, the dramatic flair of an old woman who'd grown up on folktales. Now, with her dreams full of impossible creatures and blood that burned like silver, those words felt prophetic. Dr. Vasquez, are you still there? I'm here. Elena's voice sounded distant to her own ears. What aren't you telling me? Another pause. There was a letter, sealed, with instructions that it only be opened in your presence, but there was one line visible through the envelope. Dr. Thorne's voice dropped. It mentions the Vasquez hunters. The phone slipped in Elena's suddenly sweaty palm. Those words from her nightmares, from her grandmother's stories, spoken by a stranger who couldn't possibly know their significance. I know how this must sound, Dr. Thorne continued quickly, but the university has verified the documents. Everything appears legitimate. And frankly, Dr. Vasquez, some of these items, they're raising questions that only you might be able to answer. Elena looked around the lab, at the familiar equipment, the orderly samples, the life she'd built on provable facts and measurable truths. 6 months ago, this room had been her sanctuary. Now it felt like a cage. Dr. Vasquez? Sarah touched her shoulder. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, Elena thought. Maybe I've been seeing ghosts for months and calling them nightmares. I need to think about this, Elena told Dr. Thorne. Can I call you back? Of course, but please don't wait too long. The Czech authorities are eager to resolve this matter. And Dr. Vasquez, you might want to bring your passport. Some of these documents suggest your grandmother had connections here that go back generations. The call ended, leaving Elena staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Behind her, Sarah was asking questions, but the words seemed to come from very far away. In the glass, Elena saw her grandmother's eyes staring back, dark, knowing, full of secrets that had died with her in that sterile Chicago nursing home. Except maybe they hadn't died. Maybe they'd been waiting in a safety deposit box in Prague, in a city where Elena had lost 3 days and found nightmares that felt more real than her waking life. She thought of David's dinner invitation, of her orderly research, of the safe, predictable path she'd spent years constructing. Then she thought of her grandmother's stories, of blood that burned like silver, of brave women who fought monsters in the darkness. The choice crystallized with startling clarity. Stay in her cage of fluorescent lights and measured truths, or step back into the shadows of Prague and finally learn what had really happened to those missing 3 days. Elena reached for her phone to book a flight. Elena's finger hovered over the airline app, trembling like a compass needle caught between magnetic poles. The phone screen blurred as exhaustion and terror warred in her chest. Behind her, Sarah's concerned questions faded into white noise, overwhelmed by the thunderous beating of her own heart. Book the flight. 1 tap. That's all it takes. But her finger wouldn't move. What was she thinking? Flying halfway across the world based on a phone call from a stranger, chasing mysteries that probably had perfectly rational explanations. She was a scientist, for God's sake. She dealt in facts, not fairy tales whispered by dying grandmothers in sterile hospital rooms. Elena? Sarah's voice cut through her paralysis. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Elena lowered the phone, her hands shaking. "Someone claims my grandmother left things in Prague. Documents, personal effects." The words felt hollow, inadequate to describe the dread pooling in her stomach like acid. And that's worth a middle-of-the-night panic attack because in her dreams, ancient creatures bid fortunes for her blood. Because she'd lost 3 days in Prague and couldn't remember anything but shadows and amber eyes. Because every rational instinct screamed that some doors should never be opened. "I don't know," Elena whispered. "That's what terrifies me." She thought of her carefully constructed life. The prestigious position, the research grants, the respect of colleagues who viewed her as the brilliant Dr. Vasquez, expert in the rarest blood type known to science. Everything she'd built since crawling out of Chicago's South Side, since proving that scholarship and determination could overcome poverty and circumstance. What if Prague shattered all of that? What if whatever waited in that safety deposit box revealed truths that her rational mind couldn't accept, couldn't integrate into the worldview she'd spent decades constructing? The Vasquez hunters. The phrase echoed in her memory like a curse. Her grandmother's stories had always felt like performances, theatrical tales designed to entertain a lonely little girl. Elena had treasured them not for their truth, but for the way Ileana's eyes lit up in the telling, how her voice dropped to conspiratorial whispers when she described brave women facing impossible darkness. But what if they weren't just stories? Elena's reflection in the window seemed to mock her, pale, haunted, looking more like her grandmother every day. Those same dark eyes that had seen too much, knew too much. The old blood runs true, Draga, Ileana used to say. It calls to its own kind, even across centuries. At the time, Elena had assumed she meant family resemblance. Now, with Dr. Thorne's words ringing in her ears, she wondered if her grandmother had meant something far more literal, something that made Elena's RH null, blood more than just a medical curiosity. Her phone buzzed. David again. "Elena, you missed rounds this morning. Dr. Martinez is asking questions." Reality crashed back like a cold wave. She had responsibilities here. Patients who depended on her expertise, research that could help other people with rare blood disorders, a life that made sense, even if it felt increasingly hollow. But if she stayed, if she ignored this call from Prague, would the nightmares ever stop? Would she spend the rest of her life wondering what secrets had died with her grandmother, what truth had been waiting in an Eastern European vault, while she pretended that strange dreams were just stress manifesting in Gothic imagery? "Sarah," Elena said suddenly, "what if everything you thought you knew about your family was a lie?" Sarah studied her with clinical intensity. "I'd probably want to know the truth, even if it hurt." She paused. "Especially if it hurt. Lies have a way of poisoning everything around them." Elena thought of the lawyers who didn't exist, of a grandmother who'd supposedly died of heart failure, but whose final wishes had been carried out with suspicious efficiency. How many other lies had she accepted without question? How many times had she dismissed her intuition in favor of comfortable explanations? Her reflection stared back from the window, and for a moment, Elena could swear she saw something else looking through those familiar features, something ancient and knowing, and utterly unafraid. Maybe that's what I'm really running from, she realized. Not the truth about Prague or grandmother's secrets. I'm afraid of what I might discover about myself. The thought crystallized with devastating clarity. She'd spent her entire adult life building walls around mystery, explaining away anything that didn't fit into neat scientific categories. But what if the most important truths couldn't be measured in laboratory conditions? What if some answers required stepping into darkness with nothing but faith and bloodline as guides? Elena looked at her phone again, at the airline app, still waiting for her decision. Prague beckoned like a fever dream, promising answers and threatening everything she'd built. The rational choice was clear. Delete the app, block Dr. Thorne's number, return to her ordered existence where vampires remained safely fictional and family histories stayed buried with their keepers. But as she stared at her reflection, Elena knew with sick certainty that she was already lost. Some doors, once glimpsed, could never truly be closed. Elena's finger moved before her mind could stop it. The flight confirmation appeared on her screen like a death warrant, Chicago to Prague, departing tomorrow evening. The moment she hit purchase, the lab around her seemed to shift, becoming suddenly foreign. The familiar hum of equipment sounded different, hollow, distant, as if she were already gone. Sarah's sharp intake of breath felt like it came from another world. "Elena, what did you just do?" "Something incredibly stupid," Elena whispered, but even as she said it, a strange calm settled over her. The trembling in her hands stopped. The panic that had been clawing at her chest for hours simply evaporated, or maybe the first honest thing I've done in months. Sarah grabbed her arm. "You can't just fly to Prague based on some random phone call. This could be a scam, identity theft, human trafficking. It could be." Elena's voice sounded eerily steady to her own ears. "But it's not. How can you possibly know that?" Elena looked at her reflection one more time, and this time she didn't flinch from what she saw. The resemblance to her grandmother was unmistakable, not just the bone structure, but something deeper, an expression of grim determination that belonged to women who'd faced monsters in the dark. "Because I've been running from this my entire life," Elena said. "The dreams, the questions, the feeling that nothing I've built here is real. I thought I was being rational, scientific, but I was just being a coward." She turned away from the window, began gathering her personal items from the lab. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, but her mind was already elsewhere, walking ancient streets, breathing air thick with history and secrets. "Elena, stop. Think about what you're doing, your career, your research. We'll still be here when I get back." "If I get back," she added silently. "Dr. Martinez can handle my cases for a week. The Morrison blood work is routine anyway, and if it's not routine, if something comes up that requires your expertise?" Elena paused, a blood sample halfway to the storage unit. Such a simple question, but it cut to the heart of everything. For years, she'd told herself she was indispensable, that her work mattered too much to risk on personal pursuits. But the truth was uglier. She'd hidden behind her importance because the alternative meant facing the unknown. "Then they'll figure it out," she said, placing the sample in its designated slot. "People managed rare blood disorders before I came along." Sarah moved to block the exit. "This isn't like you." "The Elena I know doesn't make impulsive decisions. She researches, plans, considers every angle. The Elena you know is a construct." The words emerged with brutal honesty. "I built her carefully, scientifically. Rational Dr. Vasquez, who explains everything and fears nothing because she's eliminated mystery from her life. But she's not real, Sarah. She's just a very convincing performance." Elena's phone buzzed with boarding pass information, gate assignments, baggage requirements. Each notification felt like a chain falling away. Her carefully ordered life, her professional responsibilities, her relationship with David, all of it suddenly seemed like elaborate theater. Roles she'd been playing so long she'd forgotten they were costumes. "What about David?" Sarah tried desperately. "He's been asking about you, planning." "David deserves someone who can love him without reservation," Elena said. "Someone who doesn't spend dinner dates dreaming about amber-eyed strangers and ancient cathedrals. Someone who isn't fundamentally broken." She pushed past Sarah, heading for her office to collect her passport and the few personal items that mattered. Behind her, Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. "You're not broken, Elena. You're grieving. Trauma makes people do irrational things." Elena spun around, and Sarah stepped back at the expression on her face. "What if it's not trauma? What if I've been sleepwalking through someone else's life, and Prague was the moment I started to wake up?" The words hung between them like a confession. Elena had never voiced the thought so clearly, but speaking it aloud felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. Terrifying and brilliant and utterly necessary. In her office, Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency, gathering documents, charging cables, the small silver locket her grandmother had given her on her 16th birthday. She'd worn it every day for 16 years, but now she noticed details that had been invisible before, the intricate engravings that looked almost like script, the way it grew warm against her skin when she was stressed. How many clues have I ignored, she wondered. How many signs dismissed as coincidence or imagined? Her computer screen showed 17 unread emails, 3 missed calls from David, a calendar full of appointments and obligations that had seemed crucial yesterday. Now they looked like artifacts from someone else's life, important to Dr. Elena Vasquez, who solved medical mysteries and dated appropriate men, and never questioned the boundaries of reality. But that woman had never truly existed. She'd been an elaborate defense mechanism, a fortress built around a truth too dangerous to acknowledge. Elena Vasquez was going home to Prague, to face whatever waited in her grandmother's shadows. There would be no going back from this threshold. She could feel it in her bones, in the ancient blood that sang recognition when she thought of Gothic spires and amber eyes. The woman who returned from Prague, if anyone returned at all, would be someone entirely different. The flight to Prague stretched endlessly through turbulent skies, each pocket of air that jolted the plane echoing the chaos in Elena's mind. She'd managed 3 hours of fitful sleep, but her dreams were worse than ever. Stone corridors slick with moisture, voices speaking in languages she almost understood, and always those amber eyes watching from shadows that moved independently of their sources. By the time the plane descended through Prague's grey morning clouds, Elena felt hollowed out, scraped raw by exhaustion and anticipation. The city spread below her like a medieval tapestry, all Gothic spires and terracotta roofs bisected by the silver ribbon of the Vltava River. Beautiful and ancient and somehow familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. I've seen this before, she realized with a jolt of recognition, not just during those missing 3 days. In dreams, for years. The customs agent barely glanced at her passport, but something about his expression made Elena pause. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with the bored efficiency of someone who processed hundreds of travelers daily. But when he handed back her documents, his fingers brushed hers briefly, and his eyes sharpened with sudden attention. "First time in Prague?" he asked in accented English. "No." The word surprised her. She'd intended to say yes, but something deeper had answered first. I was here once before, 6 months ago." He studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. "Vasquez," he murmured, reading her name from the passport. "Romanian?" "My grandmother was." Elena felt compelled to answer, though every instinct screamed that she was revealing too much. "She died recently." The agent's expression shifted subtly. Not sympathy, something closer to wariness. He stamped her passport with more force than necessary and waved her through without another word. But Elena caught him reaching for his phone as she walked away. Paranoid, she told herself. Jet lag and stress making shadows seem sinister. But her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. "In the old country, Draga, even the walls have ears. Trust carefully." Dr. Thorne had arranged to meet her at a cafe near Charles Bridge, and Elena found him easily. Tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive coat that marked him as distinctly non-local. He rose when she approached, extending a hand that was surprisingly warm despite the October chill. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for coming so quickly." His smile seemed genuine, but his eyes held the same wariness she'd seen in the customs agent. "I hope the flight wasn't too difficult." "Turbulent," Elena admitted, settling into the chair across from him. The cafe was nearly empty, its Gothic interior making her feel like she was sitting inside a church. Stained glass windows threw colored light across dark wooden tables, and the air smelled of coffee and something else, something metallic that reminded her uncomfortably of her laboratory. "I've brought some of the documents," Dr. Thorne said, placing a leather portfolio on the table between them. The safety deposit box contained quite a collection. "Your grandmother was thorough in her record-keeping." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the portfolio. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, dating back decades. Her breath caught as she recognized faces, her grandmother as a young woman, standing beside people Elena had never seen but who shared familiar features. Dark eyes, sharp cheekbones, an expression of grim determination. But it was the locations that made her stomach lurch. Gothic cathedrals, ancient cemeteries, stone corridors that looked exactly like the ones from her nightmares. Where were these taken? She whispered. Various locations throughout Prague and the surrounding regions. Some of the older ones date back to the 1940s. Dr. Thorne's voice was carefully neutral. Your grandmother appears to have been quite active in historical research. Elena studied a photograph more closely. Her grandmother stood in what looked like a crypt, holding an object Elena couldn't quite make out. Behind her, carved into the stone wall, were symbols that made Elena's locket grow warm against her skin. Dr. Thorne, she said slowly, what exactly did my grandmother do here? Before he could answer, the cafe door chimed, and Elena looked up to see a woman entering. Tall, elegant, with platinum blonde hair, and skin so pale it seemed to glow in the dim light. She moved with fluid grace, but something about her presence made every primitive instinct Elena possessed scream danger. The woman's gaze found Elena immediately, and her lips curved in a smile that revealed teeth too sharp, too white. Recognition flashed in eyes that were a familiar amber. Dr. Vasquez, the woman said, her accent carrying hints of multiple languages. How lovely to finally meet you properly. Elena's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, from dreams, from nightmares, from memories that couldn't possibly be real. This was the woman who had spoken at the auction, who had bid against the creature Elena now knew was Cassius. You remember me, the woman observed with satisfaction. Good. That will make this conversation much easier. Dr. Thorne had gone very still beside Elena, his face pale. Astrid, he said quietly, we agreed. We agreed to nothing, Astrid replied, never taking her eyes off Elena. The Vasquez line has returned to Prague. The council has every right to reacquaint ourselves. Elena's hand moved instinctively to her locket, and Astrid's smile widened. Oh yes, little hunter, we know what you carry. The question is, do you? Elena's throat constricted as the word hunter hit her like a physical blow. The locket beneath her shirt pulsed with warmth that felt almost alive, as if responding to some unseen threat. Around them, the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Other patrons continued their conversations, but their voices sounded muffled, distant, as if she were underwater. I don't know what you're talking about, Elena managed, but her voice cracked on the lie. The dreams, the photographs, the symbols carved in stone, they all pointed toward a truth she wasn't ready to face. Astrid glided closer, her movements too fluid, too graceful for anything human. Your grandmother never told you about the family business? How disappointing. Ileana was always so thorough in her preparations. Dr. Thorne's hand shot out, gripping Elena's wrist. We should go. Now. But Astrid was already sliding into the empty chair at their table, uninvited. Up close, Elena could see that her skin held an almost translucent quality, and when she breathed, the motion seemed more performance than necessity. Running won't help, Doctor, Astrid said, addressing Dr. Thorne with casual disdain. The blood calls to its own kind. She's been dreaming of us for months, haven't you, Elena? Seeing faces in shadows, hearing voices that speak of ancient contracts and older hunts. Elena's hands trembled as she closed the portfolio of photographs. Those were just nightmares. Stress from losing my grandmother. Were they? Astrid leaned forward, and Elena caught a scent like winter air and old copper. Tell me, little hunter, what did you see in Prague 6 months ago? Those 3 missing days, where did you think you went? The world tilted sideways. Elena gripped the table edge, her knuckles white. How do you know about that? Because we were watching, waiting. Your grandmother's death broke certain protections, ancient wards that kept you hidden, kept you safe. Astrid's amber eyes held predatory satisfaction. The moment she died, every creature of the night in Prague felt your presence like a beacon. Dr. Thorne was gathering the photographs with urgent efficiency. Elena, we need to leave. The safe house. Safe house? Astrid laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Poor David, still believing in mortal solutions to immortal problems. There is no safety for the Vasquez bloodline. There never was. Elena's mind reeled. David? But Dr. Thorne had introduced himself as Henry. The deception hit her like a slap. How many lies was she surrounded by? How many people were manipulating her towards some unknowable end? You're lying, Elena said, but uncertainty bled through her words. All of this, vampires, hunters, ancient bloodlines, it's impossible. Astrid reached across the table with inhuman speed, her fingers closing around Elena's wrist before she could pull away. The touch was ice-cold, and where their skin met, Elena's blood seemed to sing with recognition. Is it impossible? Astrid whispered. Or is it the only explanation that makes sense? Your rare blood type, the dreams, the way you've never quite fit anywhere you've tried to belong. Your grandmother didn't die of heart failure, little hunter. She died protecting you from what's coming. Elena jerked her hand back, but the cold sensation lingered. What's coming? The convergence. Astrid's expression grew serious, almost regretful. Every 50 years the barriers between worlds grow thin. Old debts come due. Ancient hunts resume. She glanced at the photographs scattered on the table. Your grandmother understood. She spent decades preparing for this moment, training for a war she knew she wouldn't live to see. Dr. Thorne, or David, or whoever he really was, stood abruptly. Enough. Elena, you don't have to listen to this. But Elena remained seated, transfixed by the terrible certainty growing in her chest. The locket was burning against her skin now, and memories that felt both foreign and familiar flickered at the edges of her consciousness. Standing in a stone circle, chanting words in a language she shouldn't know, the taste of copper and starlight on her tongue. The council grows impatient, Astrid continued, ignoring Dr. Thorne's interruption. Cassius protects you for now, but his influence has limits. Others of our kind are less sentimental about the old agreements. What old agreements? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. The Pact of Blood and Moonlight, signed in 1847 between your ancestor and the vampire houses of Prague. Protection in exchange for service. Hunter skills in exchange for sanctuary. Astrid's smile turned predatory again. Your grandmother honored the compact for 70 years. Now the debt passes to you. Elena felt the walls of her carefully constructed life crumbling around her. Everything she'd believed about herself, about her family, about the nature of reality itself was dissolving into something dark and ancient and absolutely terrifying. I won't, she said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Whatever this is, whatever you think I am, I'm not my grandmother. I'm a doctor. I save lives. Astrid's laughter was genuinely amused. Oh, little hunter, you will save lives, just not in the way you expect. The temperature in the cafe plummeted as Astrid's amusement faded into something far more dangerous. Elena watched in horror as the woman's amber eyes began to glow with an inner light, pupils dilating to inhuman proportions. Around them, the other patrons continued their conversations, oblivious to the supernatural tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. The choice is not yours to make, Astrid said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Elena's bones. The blood remembers, even when the mind refuses to accept. Elena's locket suddenly blazed with heat so intense she gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The silver burned through her shirt, and with the pain came a flood of memories that weren't her own. Or were they, standing in moonlit graveyards with stakes carved from sacred wood, chanting in Latin while creatures with glowing eyes circled just beyond the light of blessed candles, the weight of ancient responsibility settling on shoulders too young to bear it. No, Elena whispered, but the memories kept coming. Her grandmother's hands, steady and sure, mixing silver dust into holy water, teaching her the pressure points where vampire hearts beat their stolen rhythm, explaining how their kind could smell fear, could hear lies in the timbre of human voices. Draga, you must remember, When the time comes, you must choose their darkness or our light. There is no middle ground in this war. You're doing something to me, Elena said, struggling to her feet. The cafe spun around her, Gothic arches blurring into shadowy corridors from her nightmares. Some kind of hypnosis. Astrid rose with fluid grace, and Elena noticed that despite the woman's substantial height, her feet made no sound against the wooden floor. I'm doing nothing but allowing you to see clearly for the first time in your life. The blocks your grandmother placed on your memories are dissolving. Soon you'll remember everything. Dr. Thorne, David, whoever he was, moved to Elena's side, his hand warm and reassuringly human on her shoulder. But when she looked at him, really looked, she saw exhaustion etched in lines around his eyes, the pallor of someone who had seen too much. How long have you known, she asked him, about what I am? His silence was answer enough. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Everyone she trusted, everyone she thought she could rely on, had been lying to her. Her grandmother, this man who claimed to be helping her, even her own memories, all of it built on deception. 3 days, David finally admitted. I've known for 3 days, since I found your grandmother's real files. Elena, I wanted to tell you gently, to prepare you to manipulate me, Elena corrected, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. Just like everyone else, just like, she turned to Astrid, just like you're trying to do now. Astrid's smile returned, but this time it held something that might have been respect. The little hunter has teeth after all. Good, you'll need them. The cafe door chimed again, and Elena's blood turned to ice. The man who entered was tall and pale, with dark hair and eyes that held centuries of winter. She knew him instantly, though she'd only seen him once before, in the nightmare auction that might not have been a nightmare at all. Cassius, the vampire lord who had declared her worth his entire fortune. Astrid, he said, his voice carrying the authority of ages. You were instructed to observe, not engage. The situation has evolved, Astrid replied, not moving from her position near Elena. The hunter's memories are surfacing. The blocks are failing. Cassius's gaze fixed on Elena, and she felt like a butterfly pinned to a board. How much does she remember? Enough to know we're not human, Astrid said. Not enough to understand what that means for her. Elena found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. I remember the auction. I remember you bidding on me like I was property. Something flickered across Cassius's features, regret perhaps, or something that might have been pain. You remember incorrectly. I wasn't bidding to possess you, Dr. Vasquez. I was bidding to protect you. Protect me from what? From creatures far less civilized than ourselves, he said quietly. Your blood doesn't just sustain our kind. It can cure us. End the hunger, the compulsion, the endless centuries of necessary evil. Every vampire in Prague can sense your presence now. Most would drain you dry without a second thought, caring nothing for your survival as long as they could taste salvation. Elena's world tilted again. She gripped the back of her chair, fighting waves of nausea and disbelief. That's impossible. Blood doesn't work that way. Mortal blood doesn't, Cassius agreed. But you're not entirely mortal, are you? The hunter bloodline carries something older, something that predates the division between human and vampire. Your ancestors weren't just killers, Elena. They were bridges between worlds. The locket against her chest pulsed with heat that matched her racing heartbeat. In that moment, Elena finally understood the magnitude of what she faced. This wasn't just about vampires or hunters or ancient packs. This was about choosing between everything she'd ever believed herself to be and a destiny that would demand everything she had to give. Elena's hands shook as she clutched the locket, its silver surface burning against her palm. The weight of revelation pressed down on her like a collapsed building, crushing the last remnants of her carefully ordered world. I need proof, she whispered, real proof. Not dreams or stories or ancient photographs. Something I can test, something I can measure. Cassius and Astrid exchanged a glance that held centuries of communication. Very well, Cassius said finally. But not here. Too many mortal eyes, too many ears that shouldn't hear. David stepped closer to Elena, his voice urgent. "You don't have to go with them. We can find another way." "Another way to what?" Elena's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "To pretend I'm still normal? To go back to my lab and examine blood samples without wondering if I'm looking at the cure for immortality?" She turned to face him fully. "You've been lying to me from the moment we met. Why should I trust you now?" Before David could answer, Astrid moved with inhuman speed, her hand suddenly at Elena's throat. Not threatening, but demonstrative. Fingers pressed against Elena's pulse point with surgical precision. "Listen," Astrid whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly harmonic. "Listen to what your blood knows." Heat flooded through Elena's veins, and suddenly she could hear it, a rhythm beneath her heartbeat, something older and wilder than human circulation. The sound was hypnotic, compelling, and in its cadence she heard the whisper of ancient words, half-remembered incantations. "Stop!" Elena gasped, jerking away. But the damage was done. The sound continued, growing stronger, and with it came images that slammed into her consciousness like physical blows. Her grandmother, young and fierce, standing over a creature with glowing eyes and extended fangs. Silver dust glittering in moonlight as it fell from weathered hands. The taste of copper, and something indefinably otherworldly on her own tongue. Not blood, but something more primal, more powerful. "The convergence is in 3 days, Cassius said, his voice cutting through Elena's disorientation. "Already, the weaker members of our kind grow desperate. They can smell your blood from across the city." As if summoned by his words, the cafe's windows suddenly rattled in their frames. Outside, storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, blocking out the afternoon sun. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds, and Elena heard something that made her blood freeze, howling, but not from any creature she recognized. "They've found us," Astrid said, her earlier amusement replaced by grim efficiency. "The fallen ones. Cassius, we need to move. Now." Elena looked toward the windows and saw shapes moving in the unnatural darkness beyond. Tall, skeletal figures with elongated limbs and eyes that burned like red coals. Their movements were wrong, too fluid and too angular at once, as if they existed partially outside the normal laws of physics. "What are those?" she breathed. "Vampires who chose madness over restraint," Cassius replied, moving toward the cafe's back exit. "Centuries of feeding have stripped away their humanity, left only hunger and rage. They'll tear you apart just to taste a drop of your blood." David grabbed Elena's arm. "There's a car waiting." His words cut off in a gurgle as something crashed through the front window. Not one of the skeletal creatures, but something worse. A vampire who might once have been beautiful, but was now a study in elegant decay. Her dress was centuries out of style, her skin translucent enough to show the dark veins beneath, and when she smiled, Elena saw that her teeth had been filed to razor points. "The hunter child," the creature hissed, her voice like autumn leaves scraping across stone. "Give us the hunter child, and we'll make your deaths quick." Astrid stepped between Elena and the newcomer, but Elena could see the tension in her shoulders. "Margot, you look deteriorated." "The hunger changes us all, sister," Margot replied, circling them with predatory grace. "But this one's blood will change us back, make us whole, make us human again." Her red eyes fixed on Elena with desperate intensity. "Just a taste, little hunter. Just enough to remember what warmth feels like." More shapes moved beyond the broken window. Elena counted at least 6, maybe more, their movements coordinated with pack intelligence. The other cafe patrons had fled during the first crash, leaving only the 4 of them to face whatever was coming. Elena's locket blazed against her chest, and suddenly she knew, with terrible absolute certainty, what she had to do. The knowledge felt like swallowing broken glass, cutting her from the inside as it settled into place. "The protection ritual," she whispered, the words coming from some deep inherited memory. "I have to complete my grandmother's protection ritual. That's what she died trying to do, isn't it? Why you can all sense me now." Cassius's expression confirmed her worst fears. The barriers fell when Ileana died. You're completely exposed until I take her place. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the last of her normal life crumble away. Until I become what she was. The creatures beyond the window howled again, closer now, and Elena realized with crushing finality that there was no going back, no return to her laboratory, no pretending any of this was just an elaborate delusion. She was the last of the hunters, and the war for her soul was just beginning.